Hi, I'm Patrick Manning at Black Desert Resort. We are proud sponsors of Beyond the Game. I recognize that wins aren't always measured by points. Scoreboards don't always define champions, but the story this athlete has to tell, it does. This is why Black Desert Golf Course is proud to sponsor Beyond the Game to share this inspiring story with you. Please enjoy.
You're listening to the Utah Checkdown podcast. And now your host, Josh Furlong.
Welcome back to another edition of the Utah Checkdown podcast. I am Josh Furlong. Happy to be back as always. It's great to have football to finally talk about. We've been leading up to this forever. I know the offseason is long, and it takes a long time to be able to get to these games, but we're here. I was hoping to release this podcast a little earlier in the week, but the holiday kind of messed things up. The plan moving forward is to do these 2 times a week, have a recap episode Monday or Tuesday, and then we'll get special guests on to talk about kind of the preview of the game that upcoming week and everything that way. So today is going to be kind of a combination of the two, just simply because of how it worked and my schedule and kind of what was going on. So we'll try to recap and preview all at the same time, knowing that we have actual football. So before we do that, I want to tell you about our partners, Black Desert, who are helping with the KSL.com Beyond the Game video series. The videos highlight various athletes and give an inside look into their life. Recently, we talked with former Utah offensive lineman Garrett Bowles about how a second chance at life allowed him to pay it forward to troubled youth. You can check out that video and many others on KSL.com. Black Desert is a new resort destination in St. George that features a championship Tom Weiskopf 19-hole golf course that combines a private club feel with destination resort golf amid lava fields and 360-degree vistas. Black Desert is changing entertainment in southern Utah, and they're just beginning. Black Desert, where remarkable is within reach. Home of the Black Desert Championship PGA Tour. Alrighty then, so let's jump into the football game. Utah, as you are well aware, played Southern Utah, an FCS team, on Thursday, so they get a little bit of an extended break before they take on Baylor, and we'll talk about Baylor here in a moment. But Utah plays SUU. These games, as I've mentioned, they're typically those games that you're excited because football's back, but you're not so excited because of the level of opponent. SUU is a good team. I think they've got a lot of potential for their own respective conference and division. But I think this is just where it's at. So the real storyline here was trying to see what Utah had on the field, what their offense was going to look like, especially having Cam Rising and Brant Keithy back. And man, did they put on a show. Cam Rising comes out there, throws 10 of 15, 250 yards, 67%. And has 5 passing touchdowns. He set a career high that night, and he did that before halftime. They pulled him and put Isaac Wilson in, and we'll talk about Isaac a little bit. But pulled him in and allowed Utah to really just kind of look like the team that everybody was hoping them to be. This pass-first team. Andy Ludwig said this was the design of the game, was to be a throw-first mentality. And they showed that. This was a team that exploited SUU and had many open opportunities. I mean, you had, Brant Keithy, who had 3 receiving touchdowns. There was Dijon Stanley that had 2 wide open wheel routes that went for long gains. And so the receiving game was effective. Beyond that, though, there was a ton of other guys that were open. So it's not like these are the only options that Utah has, and this is what's going to happen for them. There was a chance that Dorian Singer could have gotten a touchdown on the very first play of the game when Cam Rising got hit. And talk about like the collective sigh inside, or maybe the pucker inside Rice-Eccles Stadium when he takes that first hit. Welcome back to football. And then every of the times that he decided to tuck and run, and it was just, there was a tense moment for a lot of people in Rice-Eccles because, they've been riding a lot on this season, and having Cam Rising hurt in the first game would have been not so good. So, but the point there is Utah has a lot of receiving options. This was a great showing. Cam Rising completed a touchdown pass on every other completed pass, Or if you wanted to go with his total passing, it was once every three passes that he got a touchdown. So you can't get much more efficient than that. Obviously, there can be better things that go on. He did miss a couple of times. There was one I remember, I believe it was Micah Pittman, that he just overthrew it just a tiny bit. Pittman got his hands on it and was able to be right there. But I mean, this is an offense that looks like it's ready to go. Utah will face tougher competition, obviously, than SUU, but you have to like what took place there, right? Especially with Cam and Brandt, the two of them coming back, they're connecting. If anything, Utah throws out that tape with Cam and Brandt, one, to be able to kind of get them comfortable, get them back into that game-like setting, but two, to be able to kind of get opposing teams to look at Brandt, right? If you want to guard Brandt, and put a lot of emphasis and attention on him, that opens it up for a Dorian Singer. That opens it up for one of these other billions of tight ends that Utah has that allows them to be able to mix and match and be diverse and do whatever they need to. Oh, and then by the way, you can, roll out Dijon Stanley in a wheel route or a different type of package that allows him to use his speed and you're toast. So I think you're seeing a little bit of week-to-week game planning from Ludwig where he's using this game as kind of the way to set teams up, right? He's not going to give it all up. He's not going to show all of his cards. I don't even know if you'll get all of his cards throughout the entire season, honestly. I think he can, do a bunch throughout the year, and depending on how this offense gels, and so far it seems like it's going well, that opens up a lot of possibilities for Utah, especially with all the depth that they have in the receiving room, and then you mix in the run game and all that stuff, and Utah has a lot of potential. So you have to like what you saw from those returners. It was a great showing. Obviously, like I said, the competition is going to get better, and so we'll see how that develops. But good to have those two guys back on the field. For Keithy, it was almost 2 years in the making. So this has been a long time coming, and fans are excited about that. So. Let's jump into Dijon Stanley real quick. Dijon Stanley, he's always been a guy. I've gotten questions a few times since that game about, is this going to mean that Dijon Stanley is going to factor in more in the running back room? And I kind of temper that expectation in terms of, yes and no. You're going to see more packages, we'll say, for Dijon Stanley where they can do a little bit more. I wouldn't even call it trickeration, but just utilize his talents in a way that the other running backs aren't utilized, right? If he can be, a great pass catcher, that allows him to be able to do some things. Maybe you put him into motion a lot more, and you use motion a lot more into the offenses, and kind of use him in kind of a Britton Covey type role. I don't want to quite say he's that level, but in terms of kind of how they could use him as the Swiss Army knife, so to speak, of the offense. But Kyle Whittingham and Andy Ludwig both said that, they expect him to see an increase in his role, in his packages that are put out there for him. You're going to put out those playmakers similar to like when they had Sione Vake come out to the offense. You're going to use him if he's available and if he's effective. So they're not going to shy away from him by any means. But it's not like he's suddenly going to be this every down back, and Utah utilizes him as the star running back. He's a figure in the room, but he's just one of a different skill set that maybe the other three, Mekhi Bernard, Jalen Glover, and Mike Mitchell don't have. So I still expect to see, there to be some competition there in that room to kind of see who emerges there. There's a lot of optimism still about Mike Mitchell, and obviously he got banged up a little bit at the end of the game and kind of tweaked his ankle a little bit as you saw him kind of hobbling off. But by all accounts, it appears that he's ready to go and will be in there. If not, they have a ton of guys that will be able to move forward. So curious to see how that works. But Dijon Stanley will definitely get some more touches. He'll get an opportunity to showcase his speed. And if teams are giving it to him, there's no reason not to continue to exploit that. So there's that. Caleb Lohner. Caleb Lohner was a guy that obviously there was a lot of expectations for. Maybe not expectations, but surprise, intrigue, whatever you want to say there. And I think early on, it's still being early and knowing that there's a ton more that needs to be done. I think he showed some optimism, right? I think he did drop a touchdown pass that was right in his hands, and he understands what needs to happen there. But he was redeemed in the fact that he was able to catch his first touchdown pass and kind of move forward with that. So I don't know that we need to go too deep on that, but I think there is still a lot of intrigue there. I think you have to be excited about what he can bring to the table and for the football team and kind of in whatever role he needs to be in, right? He's a bigger guy, so he's going to occupy a lot of space, and he has a lot of potential to be able to corral the balls and wherever they're thrown. His first touchdown opportunity, it seemed like an offensive pass interference. It was pretty blatant. So I mean, you've got to clean up some of that stuff. You can't push off too bad. Only Michael Jordan can do that here in Utah. So you get that subtle dig. You've got him that needs to clean up something like that. Unless the refs don't call it, they didn't flag it, so maybe it's fine. Use that length and get some separation and find some opportunities there. But you have to like what you see there as one of many targets in that tight end room, and I think that'll be fun to watch. Isaac Wilson, kind of jumping into that one. Isaac was thrown into a nightmare of a situation. They put him in with 38 seconds left in halftime. Kyle Whittingham, he loves to call his timeouts in these situations when he thinks he can get the football back, try to see if they can score or at least do something, right? He doesn't like to see teams just wear out the clock, especially as he's learning from his team. And so he called a timeout and got the ball back essentially with 38 seconds left. They felt like they had enough from Rising. I think everybody wanted that to happen. Nobody wanted to see Rising out there anymore. He didn't have anything more to prove. So you needed to get Isaac in there. And so this was a tough situation for the freshman, right? There's a lot of expectations placed on him, whether that is people looking at him for his brother and kind of how high he went in the NFL draft, or simply with how highly ranked and recruited he was from Corner Canyon. There's going to be some expectations, and he understands that. He understands that, this is where he wants to be. He understands that he wants to be in the mix of Ed, and the fact that he's the backup quarterback shows that. So, like I said, he was put in a rough situation. Utah knows that. They're not shy from that. They're not saying, Isaac needs to do better. No, they understood that this is not the ideal scenario to put a freshman quarterback in his very first touch in college. And so the mistakes that were there, a sack, the interception that he threw to end that drive, those are to be about as expected in that situation, right? The Southern Utah had all game, at least leading up to that point, really been focusing in on the run game. They were going to load up that box and try to wreak some havoc there and try to make Cam think a bit. And so you put Isaac in there. The only thing you're going to do in that situation, especially if Kyle is calling a timeout and looking to get the ball, they're going to pass it, right? They're going to try to take some shots downfield. And so the defense changed in the sense that it was more of a coverage defense. They weren't loading the box up, and so you had to respect that pass. And, Isaac, he didn't hit his target. He selled it a little bit. I think it was Loner that he was trying to pass to, and he just overshot him. It went right into the hands of a DB, and the rest is history. But it's one of those situations where they wanted to kind of see his resolve. You go in there and you make you take the sack. You're holding onto the ball a little bit too long, and that'll come with freshmen. That happens with a lot of them. They like to hold onto the ball because in high school you can do it a little longer. And then makes a play that the ball just got away from him, right? I mean, he's not shying away from that. I talked to him earlier this week, and he understands the situation and knows what happens. But they wanted to see his resolve and come back. And in the next half, he comes back out, and if I remember right, he had something like 6 straight completions. He did get another turnover, and part of that was, the gaps were closing faster in college than they were in high school. And so you're still learning some of that, but you have to like his ability to be able to fight back. He comes in there. He's willing to still take those passes that we didn't see last year from Utah's quarterbacks. You might get a few of those, but for the most part, they were afraid of hitting the windows, right? There might be a guy that's open, and in college, you kind of have to get the guy when they're open as best as they can, and they weren't willing to take that shot. That window closed too fast for them, and so the checkdowns weren't there, or the initial pass wasn't there, or the read, and so you need a guy that is going to make that read, right? And so there's things that he has to clean up, obviously, and things that are going to develop, but you have to like the way that Isaac goes through there. He goes in there and he's willing to fight. He's not, I don't want to say that he's not upset that he threw the interception, but he's not letting that hang on, his psyche. He's putting it to the side. He'll address that kind of stuff after the game, but in the moment, he's got to do more, right? He's got to showcase what he needs to and get the team where they need to be. And so you have to like that. You're going to take your lumps as a freshman, right? It takes time. He's not going to be Cam Rising immediately. And, those expectations, not that I think anybody was expecting that, but those expectations just aren't going to be there, right? It's going to take some time, and he's going to develop, and he's going to learn. So, a year ago from this time, he was the starting quarterback for his high school team. So it's going to take some time, but I think they like what they see. They're not disappointed in what they have by any means. They're really excited about his future, and there's a reason they made him the backup QB. You don't put a guy in that position if you don't have faith that he can do what they need him to do. So good things from him. Obviously gets that touchdown pass to Caleb Lohner. It's a nice little connection that the two had, and I think you're going to see more of that and kind of how they develop. So good for him, and we'll see how that develops as well. Kenan Johnson was the biggest name to come out of this game as a disappointment, not because of his play on the field. He was actually doing really well, but just simply because he got injured, and that injury turned into a season-ending injury. It's a knee injury. I've heard hyperextension. I've heard ACL. I'm not entirely sure yet. I haven't fully gotten the full details on that one, but either way, he has to have surgery, and he's going to miss the season. So disappointing news for him. He really was expected to be this number 2 guy next to Zamiah Vaughn. They really liked what he did on the field. You were starting to see kind of how they project him and kind of what he could do. It's just unfortunate that he was injured in a non-contact play. And so it's the first casualty of the season, and hopefully for Utah's sake, not many more will follow. Aliki Vamahi also got injured, and they feared that that was a season-ending injury, but Kyle Whittingham mentioned on Monday that they don't believe it's that, and that he will be able to return sometime this season. Not entirely sure, but that allows them to have that depth still at the defensive line, and they're going to be fine on the defensive line, even if Vamahi was lost. It hurts, but they've got the talent there. Outside on the corner spot with Kenan, that hurts a little bit more, right? Coming into the season, there was a lot of talk about that cornerback position as being kind of the thinnest, and not thinnest in the sense that they don't have bodies there, right? They've got guys that they feel are capable of doing it. They're just not game tested. They don't have the experience. Maybe some of them are still a little undersized from where they want them to be. Maybe their technique is not where it needs to be. But by and large, Utah feels like it still has the talent in that room to be able to do what it needs to, right? That they're not suddenly trying to re-script everything and trying to figure out how to change. They still feel like they have some guys that can be great corners for them and lock it down. So with that said, who are next? Right? Elijah, they call him Scooby. Scooby Davis came in and filled in immediately for Kenan. Did a good job. Got an interception, almost got it for a pick 6. He kind of got, if I remember right, it was a shoestring tackle that brought him down, but it was really close for him breaking it free and getting Utah that coveted pick 6 that they've looked for, that they lead the country in terms of having won every single season. So there's potential there, right? I think he just hasn't seen the field much, and so there's going to be some lumps that he takes and things that he has to learn. But Sharif Shah is going to coach him up, and he's going to be a guy that is absolutely in the mix. Outside of that, it looks like right now Smith Snowden, who is playing at nickel, will probably get the early nod to be that guy on the outside. They see him as an incredibly talented player, and if you watched any of his game on Thursday, you saw what he can do. He was everywhere. He had a really solid game. They like what he can do on the outside, on the inside as the nickel, a bunch of different things. And so initially, you might see him more lining up on the outside. I still think that when they go into those nickel packages, that they try to roll him out into that and put somebody else there. But at least initially, that's kind of where they're going to go. They do have Cam Calhoun, who is coming back. He had surgery over the offseason in the summer and was kind of a month delayed in his recovery. And so he's still getting up to it, acclimating to the system. He joined the team as a full participant this week, some maybe a little last week, if I remember right. And so he's just kind of getting up to speed, right? Got to get back up to that. We saw promise in spring with what he's able to do. And so, they project him to kind of be that guy that probably takes over and then moves Smith over to back to nickel. Outside of that, you still do have Scooby. They could use Teo Johnson. And then there's John Randall Jr. He's the running back that they moved over about week 1 or actually it was like week 2 of fall camp. I think he's gotten about 3 weeks in that position, and apparently he's made tremendous strides. I don't know to what extent, but they have a lot of faith in his ability on the field. He probably doesn't have the full technique needed to be able to do what Utah traditionally does, but he's picking it up fast, and it seems to be a good fit. So maybe you see him out there a little bit. By the end of the season, maybe he's more of a fixture in that position, and everything goes well. But by and large, everything's going well for them. So one of the little nitpicks that I have from the game is maybe the offensive line. It's hard to nitpick a lot of these things, especially in a defensive shutout where it was 49-0. But there were some concerning things that I think will get fixed. But it is those two, the right and left tackle, Caleb Lomu and Spencer Fano. These are guys that they have tremendous faith in. Spencer obviously knows what to do. He was the starter last year on the left side. Now he's over to the right side. But they were giving a little bit too much interior pressure, allowing the opposing team to break that and put some pressure on Cam. That has to be cleaned up. If that continues, into Baylor or moving forward, that becomes a really big worry. But I have to imagine that Jim Harding is getting that fixed quickly. I think for some of these fans, they like to get mad at Jim Harding really early on in the season, but then he gets it done, and by the end of the season, everything is okay. But that's just the nature of this. It takes time. You need the game reps. That's why you play a team like a Southern Utah and not Florida at the beginning of the season. If you're trying to mix in some of these guys, but I think they've got a good system going on. If that showcases, or it shows up, I should say, in this Baylor game, yeah, absolutely be worried. I don't know that it's a long-term worry, but I think there's some things that you have to clean up, and you don't want that to be a consistent threat all year, or Cam is going to be fighting for his life against much better defensive pressures, and teams are going to load that box, right? They're going to push it, and as much as Utah has great outside threats or even those tight ends that can work the middle of the field, it means nothing if Cam is running for his life, and you don't want Cam running for his life as much as you possibly can. So that's one thing to look at. Outside of that too, you go into this season, and a lot of people were really excited for wide receivers, and there really wasn't a lot of wide receiver play in this game in terms of the names that everybody wanted. The Dorian Singer, the Money Parks, the Micah Pittman, Damian Alford. They were there, and like I mentioned earlier, they were open in several situations. The ball just didn't come to them. I have to imagine, like I said, this is partially by design. They're trying to get people to focus in on Brant Keithy because they know how much of a flex he can be. And if you can key in on him more, that opens up, a guy like Dorian or Money or Damian Alford or any of these other guys to kind of work on the outside and do what they need to. So I wouldn't say that that's a concern right now. Utah, they completed 19.3 yards on average per completion. That's a great number. The fact that you were able to do that, that's factoring in those minutes that Isaac was in, Brandon at the last minute. They went more run game late in the game, but especially that first half. Those are some great numbers, and Utah's going to be fine. I asked Kyle if he prefers it from the wide receivers or tight ends, and he said he doesn't care. It's going to be game specific. There's going to be how the defense gives. This is all obvious, but I was more curious his take on if they have a preference. And it's just really going to come down to how the teams are playing them, right? If they're going to lock up the outside and really make it hard on Dorian, yeah, you've got Brant, and you've got some other guys in there that are going to do really well. And I'm curious to see all 6 of these tight ends and kind of how they complement this offense. One of my favorite packages was that 14 personnel. You had Mike Mitchell in the backfield. They line it up, and Mike sells that run incredibly hard, jumps over the line. Nobody's seeing a Brant Keithy streaking down the field, and it's an easy touchdown. I'm curious to see what kind of packages that are presented that way. If you can get stuff like that and then open up some of these other guys to different things, this becomes a very dynamic offense. So I know, there's always this talk, like, should Utah have 1,000-yard receiver? Yeah, that'd be great. I personally, and I believe I said this earlier, I don't know that I see it. I think Utah has a ton of talent, and they can be diverse, that I don't know that it is going to be like that, but maybe there's a chance. Outside of that, run game. They finished with 4.7 yards per carry. It's not a bad number. Utah tries to target around 5 yards, so they're within target. But you're playing Southern Utah. You wanted to see more. You wanted to be able to get more yardage out of that. But at the same time, Utah, I don't want to say that they played it safe, but they definitely didn't scheme up towards the run as much as they did the passing game, right? You're not doing things that are trying to get these guys to break off big runs. You're just trying to see what they can do to move the ball, trying to see what kind of push they can get, how they see read the gaps and all that stuff. And by all accounts, it seemed like they did well. It's just a matter of kind of developing that into what they want for the season. Like I said, the offense is very much so around pass first right now, that the run game is still going to be there, and you've got to develop that. But it's not something that you have to worry too much about. This is a team that is going to be able to rely on the run. They're going to have to do more with the run because teams are going to try to take away that passing game. And so Utah has to be effective there. And if they can't be effective in the run game and Cam can't hit his targets or the targets can't get open, that becomes a really long night. So I don't know that I worry about that section yet. Utah's always been good at figuring out a run game, depending on if they have an every down back or if they're running back by committee. This should be fine. So everything seems to be well there. Outside of that, defense pitched a shutout. You have to like what they did there. You get a takeaway with that turnover or the interception that Scooby Davis got. They obviously wanted more. They felt like they had more potential, just didn't get to it. Van Fillinger got 2 sacks. That's good to see from him. He's healthy. You had I think 4 or 5 total sacks. I'd have to look at the numbers. So they got in the backfield. You have to like that, but you want to see more. And I say that knowing that they got a shutout. So I get that. But this is a team I think that is built to really take over and do what they do on defense. If you compare that with a potent offense, this could be a really dangerous team. So we'll see what it looks like. Using that to preview into Baylor, this is a team that Utah obviously faced last year. They go to Waco and they get a 20-13 win in a game that I don't think anybody really wants to remember on either side. It's a game that just, Utah had to squeak it out at the end. They got some heroic stuff at the end to be able to get it to a win, and then almost lost it playing prevent defense. So, it's one of those games that just, you wanted to get in and out of Waco. You don't care about it. But at the same time, this is 2 different teams. Utah is absolutely different. Baylor, we'll see. There's been some changes there, and my next guest that I have will talk about that, so I don't want to get into that too much. But this is a game where Utah, depending on where you look, is favored by either 14.5 to up to 17. It's a high line. I think it is obtainable, but it is high. That is hard to be able to put in there. But I think this is a team. If Utah can establish its identity early, I don't think it's too much of a worry for Utah. They do have, Baylor has DeQuan Finn. He's a quarterback transfer from Toledo. He's a senior. He's a veteran guy. Did really well at Toledo. His first game last week, they beat up Tarleton State 45-3. He threw for 192 yards, 14 of 22. He had 2 passing touchdowns, but also had 2 interceptions. It wasn't the best showing from him. Also had a fumble that was recovered by Baylor. If I remember right, he had a couple others that could have been picked off. So it wasn't this perfect game by any means. He could be great for them, or this could be some worry, especially if he's doing that against Tarleton State. But these guys are going to make progress, right? They're going to continue to move from week to week. Utah getting him early probably bodes well for them in the sense that he's probably not going to be settled in yet. Defensively, Morgan Scalley is going to dial up some, unique packages to kind of confuse him, try to get him off balance, and try to keep him guessing as to where the players are going to be, and that becomes very opportunistic for turnovers, interceptions essentially, and Utah's hoping to get that pick six. So curious to see how that goes. Outside of that, everything was fine. They had 164 yards in the run game, 278 yards in the passing game. That run game isn't really quite there. The offensive line is not quite where they want it to be, but serviceable. And so I'm curious to see how that works. But to get more insight on that, we're going to turn over to our guest, and we'll go to that. All right, joining me today is Zach Smith. He is the beat writer for Baylor for the Waco Tribune-Herald. Zach, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. It's beautiful. It's getting cooler in Texas. It's not 100 degrees every single day, and so it's a nice day here, and I'm looking forward to coming out to Salt Lake, where I hear it's also pretty hot.
It has been hot for the last little bit, but I would say this week it kind of started to cool down. You can kind of get that fall vibe. Maybe not quite fully, but right now, looking at my watch, it says it's 75 degrees. So if that's the case, that's perfect. You're in for a treat.
Oh, that sounds so nice. I can't wait.
You're like, 75 sounds cold from where you're at right now, I'm sure.
That's true. That's what I have set in my house is my air conditioning. 70.
I remember going to the Baylor game last year, and I didn't think that they would open up the windows in the press box. And so I was like, okay, we're good. We've got the cool air. We're set. And then they opened up those, and we're just like, okay, we're going to die at a 10 a.m. game. And yeah, that was super fun.
That's a Baylor tradition. They do that. They've been doing that, I think, forever. I don't know. I'm relatively new here, but they've been doing that forever. And so, like, in 2022, they played Air Force in the Armed Forces Bowl up in Fort Worth. And I think it was the coldest Armed Forces Bowl in history. And I think it was like negative 10 degrees. Ugh. And they still opened the windows. So it was like, what are we doing? But, that's a Baylor decision. I don't make that decision. So whatever.
Yeah, that's how it goes.
It's crazy.
You won't get the windows opening up at Rice Eccles. So you just get to experience it that way. We think, I haven't asked actually, we think they put some reflective stuff on the windows this year so it looks a little darker and the sun doesn't peek in. With this being an earlier game, I'm curious to see how that works. But, enough about
Are you looking into the sun from the press box?
At that time, no. If this was like a noon kickoff, yeah, we'd be looking in a little bit. But 1:30, we should be good. It should be right behind where we're at. The poor fans in the stands will be a little bit roasted, but we are not in that scenario, so
good stuff.
Enough of the life of a media member, the privileged life. But let's jump into this game. Baylor Utah. Obviously, we saw this game last year play out. It was the first of home and home series in a game against Baylor. These were originally non-conference opponents. They weren't in the same conference. Now they are conference foes, and yes, this game won't count as a conference game in the standings, but it's still kind of a good test for both of these teams to be able to see where they're at right now. They both played FCS teams last week. Baylor beat Tarleton State. Utah beat SUU. Pretty similar scores. Not much that we're going to gain from that other than just seeing them for the first time. So coming into this, knowing that this game is completely different from last year, and I say that knowing that it is going to be completely different from last year. Utah comes in early on. It started out at a -17, so meaning Utah favored by 17. That line, depending on where you look, is about 14 and a half. With all that context, what is this overall sense of this Baylor team coming off of last year where they were 3-9? Where are you kind of getting that sense?
Well, I think this Baylor team coming into this game specifically is kind of riding a wave of confidence and optimism. And, that game last year against Utah, I mean, Baylor's like completely different from like that team is almost unrecognizable from this year, right? Last year it was a backup quarterback battling an injured ankle. Obviously, Utah had a bunch of injuries too and had their own quarterback situation, but last year for Baylor, the offensive line was Swiss cheese. The defense they played the most number of freshmen in the Big 12 last year. So I think coming into this game this year, it's a much more confident Baylor. It's a much more, experienced Baylor, and it's a brand new Baylor. They have a new offense with a new quarterback, a new offensive coordinator. A bunch of transfers came in, and Dave Aranda, who was on the hot seat rightfully last year, and who is calling plays for the defense for the first time in his Baylor career. Last time he called plays was 2019 when LSU won a national championship. So this Baylor team is confident and optimistic, and again, completely different from last year. That game kind of set football back, I think, a few decades, the way it was played. But Baylor this is a different Baylor team, and whether they actually beat Utah or even compete with Utah this weekend, vibes are high.
You like immaculate vibes, right? You want good vibes.
Oh, they're the best.
So let's kind of break down this team a little bit. As somebody that covers this team, you're going to have a better sense of what's going on. And I did a preview of Baylor long time ago in the summer, and all of this stuff is just on paper, right? And we're still kind of at that point. We're curious to see how these teams work and how everything is. But when you look at this team, what do you think is their strength right now?
Oof. Well, I think that their strength, there's two answers to that. On offense, it's the wide receivers. The wide receiver room for Baylor is I could argue it's probably one of the deepest in college football. I think they brought back their top 5 receivers. Admittedly, last year they didn't throw the ball a whole lot, so that's not saying much, but that's still game experience and all of it. So, and then they brought in a couple really big transfers out there. And so I think the wide receivers on this team give Baylor a look that certainly they haven't had for the last 2 years, and really is a part of this team that can really explode. And I mentioned a new quarterback coming in, DeQuan Finn. He was the MAC MVP at Toledo last year, and I think he doesn't have the strongest arm to throw to those receivers, but it's better than most. And so I think really if Baylor wants to do anything offensively, it's probably going to be more reliably, it's going to be through the receivers. And then on the defensive side, I would say the secondary, I mentioned that they were young last year. They went through they took their lumps last year, and they had some young players step up and do some things that, young players, they're not really sophomores is what I'm saying. So I think that secondary is really, really, really good. And so, those are two really things that I think Baylor is strong at, especially this year.
I want to get into DeQuan Finn, but before we do that, I want to kind of take the opposite side view of that. What do you think is maybe the biggest weakness for this team right now?
I mean, it's offensive line. I mean, I know that's probably across the board. Last year they allowed the most sacks in the Big 12, and they were 20th most in the nation, something like that. But so they brought in a new offensive coordinator, a bunch of new offensive transfers, and you really don't know. You mentioned it earlier how that first game against an FCS opponent really isn't the best litmus test, for how a team looks. It's all on paper right now. And I think especially with the offensive line, you really need all 5 fingers working together for it to be a cohesive unit. So there is some experience there that, again, took their lumps last year, but, until we see it against a Power 4 team like Utah, that'll be interesting to see how the Baylor offensive line stands up against Utah.
I think that leads in well to kind of talking about DeQuan Finn, right? Because those two have to have a good chemistry, good sync. Last week, DeQuan Finn threw 2 interceptions, and if I'm not mistaken, he almost had a couple more that could have gone.
That's true.
Did he have a fumble as well, if I'm not mistaken?
I think one of the running backs had a fumble.
Okay, maybe it was the running back. I can't remember what happened, but looking at that, where do you kind of pin that right now? I know at one game, like it's the first game of the season, like I get that. So we're not going to roast a guy, and I don't want to do that anyway. But do you see, this is Finn kind of getting into the system, trying to figure it out, or do you see it's an offensive line issue, or kind of where do you see things right now?
I think that first game was, I think they were trying some stuff, and I don't yes, he threw 2 interceptions, but at that point they had a pretty big lead, and I think that they were just, trying to throw the ball downfield a little bit more than they have, or see, what sort of quick decisions Daquan could make in this system, which, is new kind of for everyone here. So I don't really take too much stock in, interceptions or late game decisions that Daquan made last week. But I really think that he is I am optimistic from that first game, just because I think that there were signs that he is kind of the right guy for the job. The other, the first touchdown he scored was a rushing touchdown, and he kind of made a quick cut and kind of took off 5 minutes into the game. And I think that showed that they're in the right direction. They made the right decision going with Daquan, and that, even if, yes, he made some mistakes against Tarleton State, he's headed in the right direction, right? And I think that's all you can glean from that first game. And yeah.
Yeah, I think sometimes, people will look at stat sheets and they look at it and say, oh, he had 2 interceptions, and immediately say he didn't do well against an FCS opponent. But I think you provided great context into that, right? Like, I think these FCS games are absolutely tests to say, okay, where can we go? What are our limits? How are things going to be? It's also just an opportunity to fill out, other opponents, and it's not yourself. So I don't know that you would take too much stock into that. But when you look at somebody like Finn, where do you think is his strength? Like, what can he do for this Baylor offense that maybe they haven't had in years past, or maybe they have, they just weren't able to get it to the level that Baylor wants it to be?
Well, I think it's his athleticism and his quick decision making. Like I mentioned, that first touchdown was a rushing touchdown where things kind of broke down and he took off. And Baylor really hasn't had that. Like they have had Blake Shapen and Gary Bohannon and Kyron Jones and some of these quarterbacks that are honestly doing well at other schools, which is a whole other story. But Daquan, I think, is better than all of them from a athleticism and a decision making perspective. So I really think if that offensive line that we talked about earlier kind of isn't what they want it to be, I think Daquan gives them the option to still have some, success on offense. And that's a look that Baylor has not had before.
You mentioned that Baylor has a new offensive coordinator. It's Jake Spavital. Utah is experienced with him a little bit when he was at California. They didn't play Cal a ton, but they did get experience with him. With that said, what is different about what he does as an offensive coordinator as to oppose what Baylor had in the past?
I mean, I think the better question is what isn't. What isn't different? Everything is different, right? Like, I think Baylor used to, under Jeff Grimes for the last couple of years, they ran an offense that's kind of similar to Utah. Lots of tight ends on the field. They would like to probably establish the run, although I guess Utah threw it a little bit more in that first game. But so that's what they used to do. They wanted the good offensive line. They have a good stable of running backs, and they want to just kind of ground and pound. Even on 4th and 3rd and long, you're still going to get a run, that kind of thing. So what Jake Spavital has done is kind of flip everything on its head, right? He wants up tempo, spread the ball out, get it up quick, all of that kind of stuff. And I think it's an exciting offense. It's and some of the pieces that they brought in, including Daquan and some of those receivers, are fitting that. So I think to answer your question, what hasn't he changed? It's completely different from what Baylor was doing last year and for the last couple of years at least. So I think it's been a good change. I think if the players have embraced that, and especially with Dave Aranda taking over on the defensive side of the things, he's kind of just let Spavital cook, so to speak. And that's been good for the Bears overall, I think.
I feel like you're leading me right along where I need to go. You got Dave Aranda calling plays now on the defensive side. Obviously, the defense wasn't up to the level that they wanted last year, and it hasn't for maybe the last few years. What kind of, I guess, do you get a sense of optimism around the program that with Dave Aranda calling the plays, that there's more hope? And as such, does that hurt or help Dave Aranda's cause if he is on the hot seat? I know that's kind of two things mixed there, but what is kind of the vibe there?
I mean, they are definitely tied together, because if the defense is not good, then Dave is going to be definitely on the hot seat more than he already is. But yeah, I think there is a sense of optimism overall. I think, I don't know if you've listened to any Dave Aranda press conferences or just heard him speak, but he is kind of a different kind of football coach. He's very stoic and quiet, and he's not going to be like yelling and rah-rah and all of this. But this season has been a completely different shift in his kind of attitude, right? He is way more intense. He is way more focused. And I think he's kind of taken, like, he's kind of wearing a bunch of hats. He's defensive coordinator. He's head coach. He's doing, obviously the media stuff that comes with that. He's out recruiting. He's doing all of this. But like, now that it's football season, I think he is only wearing that defensive coordinator hat. I think he's kind of taken on himself a responsibility of being the guy on defense, the greatest mind in defense. We heard that phrase before he was hired, and I think that he's embracing that. He's embracing that intensity and focus on defense, and I think that has caused the Baylor defense to kind of follow suit. They've taken on that role that he has presented, and I think the defense overall, if they're not better, it's definitely going to cost him his job. But it's hard to believe that they won't be a little bit better, if that answers your question.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I think you look at those stats, right? And I think, if you have a guy like him who is obviously proven, obviously did it really well at LSU, there's a lot of the things there that go in his favor. But I think it's easy to say, yeah, they're going to be better. But do you feel like he has the guys that they can be to the level where he wants it? Because, like you mentioned, if this really is his way to save his job, you at the end of the day, you can be a great play caller, but if you don't have the guys to do it, that doesn't help you. Do you feel like he has enough of those guys that they can actually make enough improvements that maybe they shock people and maybe they win more games than they're expected?
Oh yeah, 100%. Like he's got his guys in there, and he's got exactly the kind of player that he wants in there. I think of a guy like there's a guy, Keaton Thomas is a linebacker for Baylor, and he was a defensive back at West Virginia. He was a outside linebacker at a community college in Mississippi, and he's kind of this unheralded, kind of below the radar guy, but his attitude and energy has completely changed the whole defensive unit. And he is a guy that Aranda focused on, pinpointed in on, and brought in for a specific purpose. And you saw in that first game, he had a pick six. And, he has just brought in his guys that really kind of are molded in what he wants to be. And I think that absolutely, this is the kind of defense that maybe isn't going to challenge for a Big 12 title, but is certainly more than capable of challenging for 6 or 7 wins in a bowl game. And I think that is the right that is the right direction for Baylor to go, especially right now.
As a coach, you have to love that, right? Like if you don't have the guys and you're in this position, like you look at somebody like Florida, Napier, he's probably in a situation where he has no idea what to do, right? And I don't know that there's much to save his job after that. So if you can have those guys, it is much more freeing, I would say, to be able to have that. So I'm curious to see how it goes. I think, honestly, Dave Aranda is a great coach. We've seen it time and time again. Obviously, that has to show up on the field, and maybe things don't translate at certain places or certain teams, but that is good to hear that he feels like he has his guys and that he can do it. So my thing with that, I agree, Dave Aranda is a really good coach, but I think of what Chip Kelly did in the offseason, right? Mm-hmm. He kind of stepped back he didn't want to deal with recruiting and NIL and all the stuff that comes with being a head coach. And I think there's a part of that if you give Dave truth serum, mm-hmm. that he really doesn't want to do that too. I think he would be probably a happier person if he were only a defensive coordinator. But, at the end of last season, I know he presented a whole outlook for how to turn the Baylor program around. And so at the same time, that tells me that he does want to be a head coach, sure. and that he does want to kind of wear all the hats. So it's kind of this, I think he's fighting in his own head a little bit. And, so it will be interesting to see how this whole season plays out on that front. I love that. I mean, the more you talk to a lot of these coaches, the more that they can disassociate with a lot of that NIL stuff, not because they don't think it's important, but the more that they can just be a coach, I think you're getting more of that, which is why you're getting the GMs, you're getting the chiefs of staffs. I think the more that they can manage that aspect of it, where they can just be a coach, the more that they like it, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I love Chip Kelly just basically saying, you know what, I just want to be a coach, and
Right.
obviously could have many Power 4 jobs in this country and decides he wants to go be the OC at Ohio State. So that's a fascinating dynamic. I'm curious to see if we get more of that, especially as this develops. But with just a
for
couple more
sure.
questions for you, who are some of the players that Utah should be looking out for? Kind of give Utah fans maybe a perspective of who are kind of the stars that are going to show up on Saturday.
We've already talked a lot about DeQuan Finn. He's going to play a huge role in this. A running back, Richard Reese. He was the Big 12 offensive freshman of the year 2 years ago, and then last year he only had a couple touchdowns, and he kind of had his role just cut for whatever reason. And I think there was some friction there between him and the previous offensive coordinator, but he's a guy that can explode. He's got speed, he's got shiftiness, and I know that as much as I talk about the wide receivers, Baylor does want to establish the run, and Richard Reese is going to be a huge part of that. On defense, Matt Jones, I already talked about Keaton Thomas. Certainly Keaton Thomas is a guy, but Matt Jones is a sixth-year senior. He's been around Baylor. He was one of the last non-Aranda recruits left on the roster, and yet he's kind of established himself as one of the best players. He's been around the block a lot. He led the team in tackles last year. I think he had 7 tackles in the first game, and is really kind of another leader on defense. He's wearing the headset. He's communicating with Aranda on defense, and then on the defensive line, Trevin Ma'ai. He's a Oregon transfer, and he's really kind of coming into himself as a player this year. He was a top 40 player, I want to say, when he went to Oregon originally from Bishop Gorman in Nevada. And so he's really a dominant edge rusher that I think is kind of due for a big season and potentially a big game. And I know he's got this one circled onto on the calendar because he's from Hawaii originally, and he's got some cousins and whatever that are on Utah. So he's literally going to be lined up against his cousin on Saturday. So he's looking out for this game as well. So those are 3 players. I'm sure there's plenty more, but those are 3 that I think are going to be really important.
That's awesome. I have to do a side note here. For somebody that lived on the East Coast, you're a Michigan State guy, right? Is that
correct?
You said Nevada correctly. So that
Nevada.
A lot of people say you said it Nevada. That's great. A lot of people on the East.
Correct?
Yeah. A lot of people on the East Coast like to say Nevada, and it really drives people crazy out there. So it was just fun.
I guess it's a subconscious thing. I don't know why. I don't know why.
Hey, it worked. You said it right. So that's all that mattered. Nevada. Yeah.
Nevada.
Last thing for me, you get put on podcasts a lot or on radio, I'm sure, and I'm gonna guess that you get asked, what is the final score of this game? To me, I hate that question because I don't think the score is really indicative of me as a beat writer, and so I like to ask as my very last question is, how does Baylor win this game? Maybe you want the score. No, just kidding.
That's a really good. I really think Baylor wins this game if their front 7 can pressure Cam Rising, right? And I think that from everything I understand about Utah, perhaps their offensive line is maybe not as experienced as it has been in the past. And I really think this front 7 is on a mission. And we talked a lot about Dave Aranda taking over defensive play calling. He's specifically in charge of the linebackers, and I know that intensity and that focus has really kind of established itself in that front 7. And so I think if Baylor can get Cam Rising out of the pocket and maybe slow down their run game and all that, that's where they're going to win. And so I think there's going to be plenty of explosive plays. It's going to look a lot different than last year, but I really think it starts up front for Baylor.
I think that's a great answer. Perfect. So, Zach, I appreciate it. Tell all the listeners where they can find you, kind of what you're working on, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, you can read all my stuff at wacotrib.com. You can follow me on Twitter or X or whatever at @byZachSmith. Let's see. I just wrote a story on Caleb Lohner. I know y'all got to talk to him as well, but he was kind of a beloved figure here when he was on the basketball team and all that fun stuff. So that was a fun story to do. And then I'm currently working on a feature on Trevin Mahai that I talked about and his kind of family background and kind of the struggles he went moving from Hawaii to Vegas and now going against some family on Utah. So that's what I've got in the works right now. And I can't wait to get to Salt Lake and kind of check out all that it has to offer.
That's awesome. I'm excited for the Caleb Lohner story. I need to go read that because this is an interesting dynamic. We didn't even touch on that. I'm sorry we didn't get that. But I think this will be fun, having a basketball player come in and play his former team, kind of. So
it was. I was talking to Scott Drew the other day,
Mm-hmm.
and he was like, he's been at Baylor for years, and this is not the first time that a basketball player has played football. He's had Rico Gathers who played with the tight ends or with the Dallas Cowboys, and Ishmael Wainwright had a tryout with the Steelers, I want to say. But it's gotten to the point where NFL scouts scout Baylor basketball practice as much as they do Baylor football practices, and so that's kind of where Caleb Lohner was found, I guess, and it's been a running joke. So it is a fascinating story, and he's a great dude too, so that helps it as well. So.
No, it's awesome. I'm excited for it. So appreciate it, Zach, and we can't wait to see you out in Salt Lake, and looking forward to the fun game on Saturday.
Looking forward to it. Thanks for having me.
Sounds great. We thank Zach for joining us today. Great insight. I think this will be an interesting game, as he mentioned. So, I don't want to say that I don't know how this game will go. I think Utah should win this game, especially if they can stay healthy. They can do what they need to, stay assignment sound. Keep Rice-Eccles Stadium pumped up and hyped up on Fox. An afternoon game. I know this isn't a night game, and so you're not going to get that environment, but if they can continue to do that, I think Utah is, good for this game. I think this is the time where Utah gets to showcase its identity and kind of what they can do in the Big 12. It's not like Baylor is, Kansas State, Oklahoma State, or any of these other teams, but I think if you can come out into this game and really establish that tone and showcase what they're all about, that bodes well, right? I don't think teams are taking Utah any less seriously, but I think if you can continue to improve and continue to develop and I don't want to even say dominate a team like Baylor, but if you can establish your identity, that's more important, and I think that helps Utah. So, you want Utah to be able to be closer to that spread. I don't know that makes it any better or worse for them if they're not. Whether you win by 1 point or 100 points, it's all the same. And if you look at the NFL, that's how they approach it, right? You win by a field goal, so what? College, it feels a little bit different because there is this, this weird stuff where you have to, style points matter and stuff like that. But I think Utah just has to continue to show that it can do it in the Big 12, continue to be on that path to be able to get a conference title, be in the mix for a college football playoff shot, whether that be by winning the conference or in an at-large bid. But if they can continue to do that, starting with Baylor, showing what they can do, I think that bodes well. So we will see how that goes. That is Saturday, an afternoon game at 1:30 on Fox. We will have a recap of that next week, and then we will be on our way to previewing Utah State. So we'll get on that. Looking forward to more of these games, and we start getting into the heart of this. So with that, we will say goodbye, and we will have some fun. We'll get into this more next week and see what this Utah team's all about. But with that, we say goodbye. Adios.